Well, Americans and Europeans, you are being dragged into war, whether you want to or not. It is the perfect storm caused by bloodthirsty politicians. First off, I'm going to explain how these things are coming at us at all angles. First, the House of Representatives passed a massive military budget worth a whopping $901 billion. That is mind-boggling. Now, when we started covering this on Redacted in about 2021, we were freaking out that it was $700 billion. It's $200 billion more now. This not only slaps the American public with more debt, it prevents it. Literally, Congress just this week added to the legislation that it would prevent the Trump administration from withdrawing troops in Europe and South Korea. Now, think about that for a second. The Constitution gives Congress the power to declare war, although most American presidents skirt around those requirements, but not to wage it. Congress is using their power to prevent withdrawal from war. Is that not crazy, right? This is happening at the same time now. Mark Rutte must have known this because the head of NATO says, all right, great. Glad the U.S. troops can stay here. They're in it with us because we're planning for war. Watch.
Conflict is at our door. Russia has brought war back to Europe, and we must be prepared for the scale of war our grandparents and great-grandparents endured. Imagine it, a conflict reaching every home.
Yeah, right. Russia. You're a bald-faced liar. You a-hole, right? Forget the fact that the CIA and their Maidan proxy war that launched it started under Obama in 2007, but really 2014, of course. So, but Russia brought war back to Europe. What about the genocide that you were carrying out against the people in eastern Ukraine, which is now part of Russia, killing civilians on a regular basis, killing children on their way to the park? But it was Russia's fault, of course.
Whereas just this week, President Putin says, we laugh when they say that. We really don't want to tango with you. It's like someone super unattractive saying they just won't leave me alone. They're obsessed with me.
I just want to chime in, like with Mark Rutte say, like, no, we're glad that the troops can't leave. Like, did we just Shanghai our military? Like, what they like? Yeah. Now we can't pull them out, so they have no choice but to stay in Europe and fight.
It would seem that's what it seems like to me.
So you're gonna have to stay in Poland and get some pierogies for Christmas. You have no choice.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, will this new war, though, be a ground war or will it be a digital war? It's an interesting question right now because this week the Pentagon announced GenAI.mil. Here's the announcement. I'm not going to play the video. You can see it if you want. Now, why would a military need its own AI platform? The answer may be, and I want to get an expert on this, but where my brain goes is that normal AI won't let you tell lies to go into war. It won't let you kill civilians. It won't let you target, right? And so maybe the military needs a murder bot that will say, sure, I'll kill that person. Yep, I'll do it. We'll fire on civilians. We don't know if they're civilians. So, okay. So here to bring in on all of this is someone who understands the military better than us, Captain Matthew Ho, former Marine captain and State Department official. Thank you so much for joining us. Where do you want to start? Does it seem crazy now that U.S. Congress has said these troops have to stay there, no withdrawal? At the same time, NATO says, great, party time, wartime.
All right. Well, thank you for having me join you, Natali and Clayton. I appreciate being here. No, it makes sense. It makes sense for the war state, right? It makes sense for the idea of the American empire and the inertia that comes, particularly since the end of the Second World War, for the United States always having to be in a state of war, right? Always to be an emergency situation, whether it's a Cold War, whether it's the global war on terror, and now, of course, whether it's you want the villains to be Russia, you want the villains to be Iran, want the villains to be China. I would note that in addition to this NDAA blocking the removing of troops from South Korea and Europe, it also orders the Department of Defense to increase action against China. Specifically, it mandates that the Department of Defense, the Navy, will increase its patrols through the Straits of Taiwan and into the South China Sea. So upping the provocation with China. So this desire for war, and whether it comes from just an imperial culture or whether it comes just from the good things that come from being on the Christmas card list for the military-industrial complex, we can see that throughout this $900 billion authorization.
Can I ask you sort of an maybe esoteric question, I guess, but founding fathers, it's like, how did we get here? I mean, it's kind of a nebulous question, but even Thomas Massey posted just yesterday. He was a guest on the show yesterday, but he just posted about how George Washington opposed all of this, right? This is goes back. He posted this quote from George Washington: "Why quit our own to stand upon foreign ground? Why, by interweaving our destiny with that of any part of Europe, entangle our peace and our prosperity in the toils of European ambition, rivalship, interest, humor, or caprice?" How do we come so far away from that?
I think it's what the founders understood, that these sorts of things, imperial adventures, wars, being in command of large standing armies, it's intoxicating, right? This goes to what Fyodor Dostoevsky says about how blood and power are intoxicating. Or, you can refer to, say, Senator William Fulbright, who says, of essentially the American government in the 1960s during the Vietnam War, that power confuses itself with virtue, right? I mean, so there is a self-righteousness that is imbued in these men and women through the power that they sit on top of. And then, iteration after iteration, conditioning upon conditioning, inculcation on inculcation about America as the white knight, right? Or about the need for America to be the world's police. This idea that we are always in some type of Manichaean struggle versus good and evil. I mean, how many times in our lifetimes have we been referred to the new Hitler that we have to wage war against? Right? I mean, so it's structured in such a way that there's a morality behind it. And that morality is essentially good politics. It doesn't just let you wave the bloody flag, as they said at the end of the 19th century, but also allows you to suppress any type of dissent. Because people like you guys, myself, I imagine most of the folks who are watching, we're unpatriotic, right? We know that's not true, but that's the way it's phrased as. And then, of course, you have the inertia. You have the Leviathan that is the military-industrial complex that is financing all of this, and that stands to benefit, again, as we could see that throughout the 3,000-plus pages of the NDAA.
Now, Pete Hegg said this weekend, he romanticized the Reagan-era great military buildup and says that he wants to oversee something similar right now under the Trump administration. It stands to reason, then, that if there is a war with China on the horizon and we cannot withdraw existing troops from other conflicts, that's what we would need. Even though I think it was the New York Times this week that also published assessments from military personnel saying we can't win it. There's just every trick up our sleeves the Chinese could anticipate and thwart. So what do you make of that reporting?
Well, that reporting is absolutely accurate, Natali. We wouldn't win in a war against China. One, just comparison-wise, you're talking about the world's largest manufacturing power in the world. Their ability to produce, whether it's technological or whether it's just metal, steel, and iron, is magnitudes of order, not just beyond the United States, but beyond the United States and our allies. But more importantly, this is something that you hear very few commentators speaking about. The United States is losing when it fights wars. And I'm not just talking specifically about Iraq and Afghanistan, but look at the performance of the United States Navy against the Houthis in the Red Sea. Right. Under both the Biden administration and the Trump administration, the American Navy essentially had to retreat. We had to strike a deal with the Houthis against the Iranians. Donald Trump, in my estimation and many others, had to stage a stunt, flying in those B-2s, dropping in 14 massive ordnance penetrators, claiming to destroy the nuclear labs there, essentially because the Israelis and the Americans were running out of missiles to shoot down the Iranian missiles. And then most damningly, and I think the one that is spoken about the least, and you can understand why it's not talked about here in the United States, is the fact that the Ukraine war, which is an American/NATO proxy war, has been commanded by American generals. And as the New York Times laid out so well last spring, the American generals were the ones commanding the Ukrainian army for the first few years of this war. I'm not sure if it's still the case, if they're still doing that out of Wiesbaden, Germany or not, but at least in the first few years of the war, including that disastrous 2023 offensive by the Ukrainian army, it was the American generals who were ordering, who were commanding, who were planning the big arrow movements of the Ukrainian army. And so who were the American generals fighting against at that point? They were fighting against the Russian generals. And anyone who's looking at this objectively with any degree of honesty will say the Russian generals defeated the American generals on the battlefields of Ukraine.
Isn't it upsetting, though? You can ask the next question if I could just respond. That to see Mark Rutte saying, like, the peace that we've known is over. We got to be brave like our grandparents. And my response to that is a middle finger. That's just, it's so upsetting. You don't get to say because you've not been honest about anything. Go ahead. Just need to be mad for a second.
I was going to ask you basically the same question about Mark Rutte and what NATO's plan here is, which, you have Congressman Massey, Senator Mike Lee pushing forward this legislation to get us the hell out of NATO, which, as Colonel Douglas McGregor has said on our show many times, is a Cold War relic. It's going to collapse. It's all but inevitable. So then this NATO proxy war, how can it stand? How can it continue? I mean, we're seeing and how can we tolerate this? I mean, the American people are fed up. They don't want this. If you ask the average American, do you want us spread thin around the world carrying out these proxy wars? Overwhelmingly, all these Trump voters are going to say, absolutely not, we don't want this. And yet it continues at scale.
Right. I mean, that's because Washington, D.C. is so distanced, so fenced off or fortified from the American people, particularly when it comes to issues of war and peace. What happens in the second half of the Obama administration is this pulling away from ever committing American ground forces that would sustain casualties and numbers that would have a political consequence, right? So you go back to the political consequences of the Iraq War in 2006, 2008, even in 2016, a lot of data out there supports the idea that 2016 was a referendum still on the Iraq War, right? And the administrations know this now. That's why you see American war fighting over the last dozen or so years essentially being proxy wars or being hidden wars carried out by drones and commandos, all classified operations, or utilizing contractors and mercenaries, or using hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians to throw into a furnace of war. So I think that's the way the American leadership looks at this. And then again, there's the inertia behind this, right? The military-industrial complex. And so we see a racket that is something that why would you not take part in? The only thing that's going to come from not participating in that racket is for you to be on the outs. And so I think that's what we're looking at here when we see the various reasons why there is support for these wars among political leaders, including those in Europe whose whole identity is based upon this war. I mean, the European leadership on this, there is just a grotesque display of ignoring their own problems at home. Europe, continent-wide, has issues with housing, energy costs, immigration, quality of life, wealth inequality, deindustrialization, et cetera. And the European leaders that makes these people think that their identity and their political future depends upon war and militarism. And this is what you get. And then you get where this is propelled over years. There's no way to back out of this. Essentially they put themselves into a corner. And so as we're watching here, the E3 there, Macron and Merz and Starmer, how can they back away from this war where for years they've told their people that this is existential, that if we don't defeat the Russians in Ukraine, then Warsaw's next, followed by Berlin, then Paris, then they're going to cross the channel. I mean, so this is what you're dealing with here, a mindset that is informed by many different things, but none of which are in the interest of their people.
Yeah. And on top of that, then you've got the censorship. So then they're not able to get the proper information about all of this. Their energy costs are skyrocketing. They're shutting down nuclear power plants. People are living, in horrible situations right now across Europe, and then the propaganda machine, and then the AI piece of all of this.
Yeah, I do want to ask you about the AI piece because What do you make of that? Now, maybe I'm being cynical, but my take on that is, oh, they need a war bot, basically, because the consumer-based AI, as biased as they are, will still not let you, like, I tried to have this exercise of like, hey, you know, can we start a war based on WMDs? And it doesn't let me. If I try to get my AI to say, can I start a war with Iran based on hypothetical nukes? And it won't let me. So, you know, I think this is my cynical take on it, that they need something to work around because so many wars are sold on lies and propaganda. But what am I missing here? Maybe there's a benevolent reason and I'm just being cynical. What do you think?
No, absolutely not, Natalie. Sorry to say that. Okay. And I think it's worse than that. And what Hegseth was talking about here was a platform to go on military desktops around the world, just as we use ChatGPT or OpenAI or Claude or Gemini or whatever. This is a secure version for the Pentagon and the military services that doesn't allow information to get out, essentially, because we all know that AI takes as much information from us as it gives us, right? So the military needs something that would be sealed, that would only essentially be one way in, not one way out. The problem with that, to get to the point you were getting to, Natalie, is that who controls the AI? You know, and this is the two main things I see this reliance on AI, or the future reliance on AI, going towards. And Hegseth said yesterday or the day before that, you know, you spell the future of war with two letters, AI, are two things. One, a continuation of the outsourcing or privatization of war. So who ultimately owns these AI platforms, and then who informs them? And who gives them its algorithm and its programming and essentially its orders on how to answer questions? I've been coming across this more and more as I do my work, as I do my research. And I got into it with ChatGPT today regarding what are reliable and reputable news organizations. And you can imagine the response I got from ChatGPT about that.
Did smoke start coming out of the machine?
This is really important, right? You know, that the answer it gave me was that it relies, at the end of the day, it defers. Its programming tells it to defer to institutional structures as opposed to historical accuracy. So, you know, internally, are you going to have AI programs that are not going to give honest, candid, objective information to members of the military, but are going to give them information that is based upon narratives that the Pentagon itself wants, or maybe the manufacturers of these programs want? The other thing about this is there's always this idea that as technology advances, the military becomes more accurate, and so less harm is done to civilians. This is a great myth. I mean, one of the great myths about precision-guided munitions, right? So laser-guided bombs or GPS-guided bombs is that they were invented in order to not have as many civilian casualties.
It's
That's
the
a complete lie.
Precision paradox. Yeah. Right.
There was no purpose in preventing civilian casualties. The purpose was to make the weapons more efficient, so we had to drop less bombs to, say, blow up a bridge. When you had an unguided bombing system, it might take you 10, 15, 20 bombs to hit a bridge. But when you bring in a laser-guided bomb, you only need one bomb. Right? You know, I mean, that's the idea behind it, is efficiency. You even see it in things now. There's a weapon out there. If people read the reporting coming out of the genocide in Gaza, the Israelis use a bomb a lot of times called the small diameter bomb. And in conversations in the U.S. and Washington, D.C., they will tell you the idea the small diameter bomb was meant to limit collateral damage, limit killing men, women, and children who aren't combatants. That's not the reason. The small diameter bomb is exactly what it says. It's a small diameter, which means that you can get more of these onto an airplane and drop more of them. That's the whole purpose in the small diameter bomb. It's not meant to limit collateral damage or to limit civilian casualties.
Oh my gosh.
And what you see then, though, is where does this technology go when you start talking about AI? You just have Volodymyr Zelensky talking about how dangerous the AI advances in the Ukraine war are. You know, a sense of the autonomy that we've seen coming through in some of the drone systems. The Russians have some AI drones that operate on their own, essentially. This way they can't be jammed. You know, it's one of the reasons, but also, too, they take off with orders put in of what they're going to go look for, what they're going to find. But what we've really seen the inhumanity, the dystopian nature of AI is through the Israeli systems. Yeah. So in Gaza, you've seen that Israelis utilize 3 separate AI programs, Lavender, Gospel, and Where's Daddy. All of these are incredibly nefarious and insidious, and I encourage people who are not familiar with them to look them up, particularly the reporting that came out of the Israeli media on this, plus 972 magazine. But just an example, Lavender is a program that scans the internet, scans social media, whatever databases it can get into, and it identifies targets. So because, Clayton, you clicked on something on Facebook 3 years ago, that may mean that you're a Hamas supporter based upon the parameters of the Lavender program. And then what it does is it connects, that Lavender program then connects to a program called Where's Daddy? And Where's Daddy was a program that ensured that the Israeli drones and the Israeli warplanes were hitting Palestinian resistance fighters, not when they were away from their families, but when they were with their families. So the Where's Daddy AI program would track the targets that Lavender would identify, and then it would tell the Israeli warplanes or the Israeli drones when to drop their bombs, when to fire their missiles, based upon when those resistance fighters were at home with their families.
I mean, this was shocking. And so friend of the show, Tucker Carlson, just kind of did a report on this today, too. I encourage people to watch it, to go more deeply into what Matthew's talking about here, which is crazy. That they had to track men and then bomb them when they're with their children, not when they're without their children.
Right.
I mean, you can't get more demonic than that. I mean,
and if anybody thinks that an American AI system is somehow going to be any more benevolent, less dystopian, right, any less criminal or immoral, I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah.
Hey, even Ambassador Huckabee today, I don't know if you saw this, Matthew, I'm sure you did, said Israel did not attack Qatar. They just sent a missile into their country aimed at one person. And unfortunately, he says, quoting him now, there were some people who were nearby that missile strike that were injured or killed from it. So they didn't attack Qatar. They just sent a missile there, like Santa would send presents to a kid, I guess.
Right. This is the way that people justify themselves. The way that these war crimes, these atrocities are apologized for. It's what allows the warfare to continue, so swimmingly. I'm reminded of what George Orwell said about the war in Spain, in which he took part of in the 1930s. And that was really the first war where aircraft were used in a modern manner. And Orwell took heart in that. Right, in the sense that maybe this means that those who are the loudest cheerleaders for wars, those who believe in the war the most, those who support the war the most, or who make apologies for it, like a guy like Huckabee, maybe because now these planes are able to bomb something 200 miles from the front lines, maybe that means these cheerleaders for war, if they get some holes put in them, they'll be less supportive of the wars. That's the type of thinking that we have to go to, is how do we make people who benefit from the wars feel the cost from the wars? And I'm not talking about blowing up Mike Huckabee or anything like that, but in the general sense of how do we make the costs of war be felt, not just from the people on the ground who are enduring this, but among the ruling classes that benefit from it.
Yeah, and then we're going to take a break here in a second, Matthew, and sort of reset and come back. I want to talk to you about the Taliban funding. But yeah, I mean, you have these drone strike operators that they're in Oklahoma and they're like kids out of college, and it's the highest rate of suicides because these kids are like sitting in these like little trailers, just like bombing children in the middle of nowhere, and they end up killing themselves. It's horrible. Anyway, Captain Matthew Hoad, thank you so much for being here. We're going to take a quick break. We'd love you to stick around. I want to talk to you about this Taliban funding, which continues. $45 million just sent to the Taliban in Afghanistan.